All right, welcome back. We are going to go through Revelation chapter 12 in this video. And we're going to review that. All right. This one's a little different than some of the other ones. It almost has the feeling of a backtrack, if you will. So you kind of get the progression of the seven seals, you get the progression of the seven trumpets, but in between the seven trumpets and the seven bowls of wrath, you get this kind of scene here, and it almost looks like we're dealing with a vision that takes place more like the birth of Christ, right? So just to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, it's in this vision, he sees a woman who gives birth to a son who's going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And that's what was spoken about Jesus and the Messiah. He's eventually taken to heaven to be with God. The dragon tries to kill the child, but she flees into the wilderness. It really looks like the birth scene of Jesus. I know some people think this is talking about, symbolic of, maybe the early church or something like that. But just the fact that the child is called to rule with a rod of iron makes me think that what we're looking at here, he says this is a sign that appears in heaven. So that piece is going to be important. But it appears to be he's going all the way back, because he's going to be talking about the beast who is empowered by the dragon, right? And so that's where the book is headed, is several chapters about the beast who's empowered by the dragon and the war on the church, which, I believe we can make a strong case that the dragon is Satan, the beast is Rome, and it is going to destroy the great harlot, which is Jerusalem, and persecute the saints. And so all of that takes place in the early church. But as the setup for explaining why the dragon is on earth, excuse me, why the dragon is on earth and why the dragon is persecuting everyone, he goes all the way back to the birth of Jesus and how the dragon loses in the life of this child, right? And he's angry now because he's lost. Not only did the child do what the child was supposed to do, but there's a war, it says, in heaven, and the dragon is thrown down and he is defeated. And so now he's angry, right? And so that is the kind of behind the scenes explanation for the early church about why they're going to go through over these next 4 or 5 years this terrible persecution, right? He's saying it's not just business as usual. There is a war in heaven. The dragon lost, and he's going to use the beast, which is Rome, to exact vengeance, persecution on God's people because he's angry, right? So I think that's why we kind of go backwards a little bit, because he's setting the case that this dragon is thrown down because of what happens with this child who is born, which we know is Jesus, right? Okay, so in chapter 12 he says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth." So in a certain way this could be about Mary, but because she's the one that literally gives birth to Jesus. The other thought is this is, the woman is Israel giving birth to the Messiah. Not necessarily specifically just Mary, but maybe. Obviously Mary is the literal mother. The reason why is because it's using the same imagery from the Joseph story. So if you remember, Joseph has his dream before he's ever imprisoned, that he tells his family and his father that he has this dream of the stars bowing down to him, and the sun and the moon bowing down to him. And the sun and the moon were his father and mother, and the 12 stars were his brothers, and they were all bowing down to him. And so that picture of the sun, moon, and the stars from the Joseph story was a picture of Israel. So when he says, I see the sun, moon, and the 12 stars giving birth to a son who's going to rule the world with a rod of iron, it is, in one sense, Mary was literally his mother, but because of the 12 stars, it is more a picture that the nation of Israel is finally giving birth to their Messiah, right? And so, he says, and being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. So this fiery dragon, which later becomes, the empowering of the beast, is said to have 7 heads and 10 horns. Right? Later, we get some more description that makes it very clear this is talking about Rome. It talks about the city on the 7 hills. Almost anyone, whether you're a futurist and you think this hasn't happened, or you're a preterist and you think, or a partial preterist, you think most of Revelation has already taken place, there's a lot of unity on the idea that this is dealing with Rome. And so it causes futurists who think this hasn't happened to say that Rome is going to rise up again, and they talk about an antichrist, which is nowhere in this book, rising up and doing all this stuff through Rome. So if you ever hear that, where they're talking about Rome has to rise again, it's because this passage here is clearly talking about Rome. I would make the case that it is Rome, but it's talking about Rome of the generation of the people that the book was written to. And it is talking about Rome coming back in and persecuting the saints, which happened when this book was written, and destroying the harlot, which is Jerusalem, which happened while this book was written. But to give some explanation on this 7 heads and 10 horns, I think it's just as simple as Rome was divided into 10 regions, and there were 7 Caesars, from Caesar Augustus to the fall of Jerusalem, right? And in the 6th Caesar was Nero, and it talks about that they are in the. It even says here that they're in the time of the 6th head, right? The 6th king, which is Nero, and he's the one that did all the persecution. Now, it is the 7th head of the beast that comes in and finally destroys. So Nero kills himself, and then there's a fight to see who's going to be Caesar, and a couple people try, but then they're not really Caesar, just for a few weeks or months, and then finally Vespasian comes in, and he is a real Caesar again. He's the 7th head, and he sends the army down to destroy Jerusalem. So there's a few months where Nero kills himself, and Vespasian is the general of the army, and he has Jerusalem surrounded. So when he realizes Nero has killed himself, and he realizes he should be the next Caesar, he makes his move and brings the army back to Rome. And in between, a couple of guys were trying to figure out, say, hey, I want to be it, and they ended up being killed and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't believe those are being counted in the 7. It's Vespasian comes back with the army and says, no, I'm the next Caesar, and he is that 7th head that completes this whole picture, right? So from Augustus to Vespasian, you've got these 7 heads of the 10 districts of Rome, and this is the beast, right? And so he says, his tail threw down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them down to the earth. A lot of people take that to mean that 1/3 of the angels fell with Satan. I don't think it has to mean that. In fact, I think it probably does not mean that. Nowhere else does it talk about that. Now, are there a lot of demons on the earth? Yes. But demons and fallen angels are not the same thing. Demons are the trapped spirits from the flood. They're not necessarily fallen angels. Fallen angels are a much more powerful group, right? So there are some fallen angels. The Bible talks about many of the fallen angels are being held in chains right now, right? So you get Satan cast down. I think what it means is, coming back to this imagery of the 12 stars in the sky, the 12 stars in the sky from the story of Joseph and from this, that's the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And so Abraham was told, your sons, look up, will be like the stars of the sky. And so when it says the dragon sweeps down a third of the stars from heaven, I believe all it's saying is, a third of the children of Israel that should have gone to heaven because they are in covenant with God are lost because of the evil of the dragon. And they go and they follow the dragon. I don't think it's talking about, now are there fallen angels? For sure. I think this is talking about how many Israelites end up following the ways of Satan and the enemy instead of staying true to God's covenant and staying the stars of heaven, right? But it does talk about a war, and that Satan does have some angels on his side, for sure, who are fallen into his deception. And so that's going to talk about here in a second. That starts in verse 7. So let's just finish this part about the child who was born. In verse 4 it says, the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Clearly that's Jesus, right? And so Satan's trying to kill this child. So you see him influencing Herod, right, to kill all the baby children. Says then the child was caught up to God and to his throne. So that's the ascension of Christ, right? That the child that was born, which is Jesus, does not stay on the earth. He goes to the right hand of the Father. And Satan's whole mission from the time Jesus was born was to kill that child, right? And it says the woman fled into the wilderness where a place was prepared by God that they should feed her for 1,260 days, right? So some people, will look at this and think this is just talking about Israel and God protecting Israel right before the fall of Jerusalem. I tend to think this is more just a snapshot of the early life of Jesus. Jesus is born. Satan's whole mission is to kill him. Eventually, Jesus is caught up to the throne room of heaven, like it says. There is a window of time while Herod's trying to kill the babies that Mary and Jesus and Joseph flee out into the wilderness for a couple of years, and then they come back. I think that's kind of the nutshell story of the birth of Jesus. All the elements are there. Israel gives birth to their Messiah. Satan comes, wants to kill him. They flee into the wilderness for a few years. The child eventually is taken to heaven and is in the throne room of heaven now. So clearly to me, this is really a lot of overlap with the birth of Jesus, right? And so it's kind of almost like going backward a little bit to show the backstory of what happened between Jesus and Satan, and he's going to now give us a glimpse into what was going on in the heavenly realm. And all of that is the setup for the next few chapters that are going to talk about the rise of the beast, right? And the dragon. So verse 7 says, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So clearly the dragon and Satan is the same thing. He deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So Satan is sent to the earth. His angels are sent to the earth. Let me show you a scripture here. Again, I think this is right around the earthly life of Jesus, right? So let's go to Luke chapter 10, verse 17. So Luke 10, we'll be in verse 17. It says, Then the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing shall by any means hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you. Rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. Do you notice we said in 18, he says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So during the ministry of Jesus, he's in his 30s, his early 30s. He's saying at that point, this part in Revelation where there's a war in heaven and Satan is cast down to the earth has already happened. Jesus said, I already saw it. It already happened. Satan had fallen down, which I believe is why you see Satan on the earth tempting Jesus, testing Jesus, and so, but Jesus teaches as if this is something that's already happened. Go to John 12 too while we're over here looking at the Gospels. We're going to be in John 12:31. He says, Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all peoples to myself. This he signifying the death that he would die. So he says the ruler of this world will be cast out. So you have kind of almost two things. He's cast out of heaven down to the earth. And now Jesus is saying that he's going to be cast out again. From even his earthly authority, right? So I think it's two different things. He's cast out of heaven and he's here on earth. But when Jesus rises from the dead, he says, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. And so Jesus takes whatever earthly authority Satan had, right? And so in Revelation talks about Satan being bound, right, after the ministry of Jesus. Right, so, but there is a window where the dragon is able to make war on the church, but he's in furious anger because he knows his time is short. But then right before the 1,000 years of peace, he's bound. So he has from the time he's cast down to whenever the 1,000 years of peace starts, when he's bound, and so he's making war, right? And so... So you have him cast out of heaven, but Jesus is saying here he's also the God of this world, and the ruler of this world, and he's going to be cast out of that as well. So not only did he lose his place in heaven, he's lost his authority on the earth. So both of those are victories. You see the angels fighting in heaven and Satan cast down to the earth. Then Jesus follows him and takes away all his authority on the earth. I think it's kind of an interesting the timing. If you look at what it's saying in Revelation 12:7, it's saying a war breaks out in heaven and Satan is cast down to the earth. Right? So, war breaks out in heaven, Satan is cast down to the earth, and you know what happens right then? Either right before or right after, but in that same time frame, here comes the Messiah. Satan has been cast down, and here comes Jesus to go head to head. Right? I think the end is, Jesus could have come at any point in history, but when Satan is cast down, Jesus comes right away to take his authority from the earth. So, kind of an interesting. If you look at the timing. I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as Satan is thrown down, here comes Jesus to rescue his people. And so you see Satan cast down, and immediately you see Jesus taking on the flesh and coming to do battle with Satan here on the earth. Kind of interesting with that timing. And so he says, Satan was cast out from heaven, sent down to the earth. So Satan is no longer in heaven, right? He says, then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before God day and night, has been cast down. So it's interesting. I think that's what he's talking about there. I think he's saying Satan was cast down and he has come down to the earth. And so now following him has come the salvation and the strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For, it says, because the accuser has been cast down. And so now here comes the kingdom too. And it says they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. So he's saying everybody in the heavenly realm, rejoice, because I don't know what it was like up there, but Satan was allowed to be up there. He said they're rejoicing now because he was cast out. That part is done. He's not there anymore. But he's saying that means he's down here with you guys on the earth with us. And he says, so woe to the earth, right? For the devil has come down to you having great wrath because he knows that he has a short time. So I don't know how much time he had, whether it's just those years of persecution, or if he's saying from the time of that persecution until right before the millennial reign of Christ. But whatever it is, he's a spiritual being, and we don't know how long he's been alive. Could have been, for all we know. God hadn't just started creating things. God's been creating things for eternities past. There are some beings that have dwelt with God for probably billions of years, if not more. God didn't just start a couple thousand years ago figuring out how to create stuff. He's always been around, and he's always been a creator, which means there could be some beings in his kingdom that their age would blow your mind, And so we don't know how old Satan is. But we know there's a very good chance he's been around for a long time. And so whether this is saying he only has a few years of this persecution, or a couple thousand years from the persecution at the early church to the millennial reign, the millennium, whichever one it is, it's probably, if you've lived 1,000,000 years, even 2,000 seems like, oh man, I'm out of time, So whatever it is, it says his time is short. And it says, the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, and he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, at times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. So the Bible doesn't say anything about them being under any kind of attack at all while they were in Egypt. It seems like they were free. And that reference to the 2 wings of an eagle, if you look at that I don't know if I wrote down the reference or not, but I know that in Exodus, when God is describing Exodus 19:3, if you want to go back and look at that on your own, he describes when he takes the Israelites from Egypt through the wilderness. He picked them up with the wings of an eagle and brought them through the wilderness. And now he's saying that the woman and her child, he picks up on the wings of an eagle. And it's the same journey back through the wilderness, but back to Egypt this time. Instead of from Egypt to the promised land, it's from the promised land back to Egypt. But it's that same imagery from Exodus. When he took Israel from Egypt and brought them to the promised land, Exodus 19 says, I took you on the wings of an eagle and brought you from one place to the next. And it's the same thing here. He takes the woman and her child, brings them on the wings of an eagle all the way back to the wilderness. And it says, the serpent spewed water out of his mouth. So keep in mind, this is a vision, right? In Isaiah 8, 5, we can read that one. It's that same imagery. So we're going to look at Isaiah 8:5. We'll find it. Okay. It says, "For as much as the Lord spoke to me, saying, Inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloh that flow softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah, said, Now therefore, behold, the Lord brings over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria in all his glory. He will go over all his channels and over all his banks." It's an Old Testament imagery when he talks about the river. He says, "I tried to give you soft waters that would be peace, but because you've been in rebellion, I'm going to allow this mighty river to overflow you." And it was the description of the army of Assyria. And so he used that imagery of spewing out a river to describe the sending of an army against them. So the dragon is mad at the children that are coming from from the Messiah, which is the church. And so he spews out a river against the child, against everyone that comes from the child. But the Lord kept him safe, right? It says, "The earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman." So, here's one thing that I think is kind of, I don't know if that's what it's talking about, but I think it's interesting. He says he spewed out the river, which, like I said, in the Old Testament was talking about an army, but I think that imagery could be just imagery of an attack. He attacked the woman and the child. It doesn't probably necessarily have to be an army. But anyways, how did the story of Jesus go? Satan attacks Jesus, right? And it says here the earth swallowed up the attack and helped the woman and the child. And so it's almost a picture of his death and resurrection, that he tried to attack him and the earth swallowed up the attack and helped the woman and child, and he was resurrected. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting thought. But the main idea is there's a war in heaven. Satan's been cast down. Jesus comes. They go through their thing here. Satan is trying to kill Jesus, and he does. And Jesus resurrects, goes to the right hand of the Father, and now Satan is defeated and realizes it. And so now he turns to make war on the other children of the woman, which includes Jewish people. He attacks them. It includes the church. He attacks them. And so that's kind of the setup for these next several chapters where we're dealing with the attack of the beast, right? Let me show you. Go to verse 12, Revelations 12:12. It says, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them." Right? Satan's no longer in heaven. He's down on the earth. But what does he say? "Woe to the inhabitants of the land." It says earth, but I think it's going to make more sense if you say land and the sea. All the way throughout this book, land, even though I've told you that when they translate that word earth, you can either choose the word earth or you can choose land. If you choose earth, then it makes this seem hugely apocalyptic. The whole world's going to be destroyed, and that's never happened. And so people say, "Oh, this must be future." If you translate it into the word land, then it becomes about the promised land. It becomes about Israel, and it's focused on that and things that happened there. And those things did take place already. There have been times where a third of Israel was attacked, and all of that happened in this early church. So when he says there is a beast on the earth and the sea, I think it's going to be better for you to understand land and sea. Land, speaking about the promised land, and the seas, it even says that in another place, the seas are many nations and peoples. It's the Gentile nations, right? And so he says, woe to the land, which is Israel, and woe to the other nations, because Satan is coming down to you. And the next chapters say, I see a beast coming out of the land and another beast coming out of the sea. And so, but both of them are Satan. He says, woe to the land and to the seas, because Satan has come down to you. And the rest of the book is the unfolding, or at least the next several chapters, of a beast from the sea, which we're going to see is Rome and its armies, and a beast from the land, which is something coming out of Israel that we'll talk about in the next video, right? And so, but I think it's interesting, the setup here. This is, all of this was leading up to this part where he says, because Satan has been cast down, woe to the land and the sea. And if you look at chapters 13 and on, we're now seeing the two beasts come from the land and the sea. So I think that's why he had this in chapter 12, this almost like backtrack, you know, so that you could understand why the beast is attacking everyone. It's not just because he's evil. He's attacking everyone because he lost a war in heaven. He's been cast down and he lost to Jesus. And so now he's angry and he's going to take it out on the Jewish nation and the church. And so that's chapter 12. We'll come back in the next video. And we're really getting into the heart of what a lot of futurists kind of, I think, stumble on. You know, we talked about Matthew 23, you know, and the prophecies of Jesus, and I think a lot of futurists stumble there because they're not paying attention to the questions that were asked. And I think a lot of futurists stumble here because most of the time when you talk about end times teaching, it's these sections about the beast and the mark of the beast and the rise of the beast and all that kind of stuff that have been, I believe, twisted to present a side that is not going to be accurate. I have one other idea I wanted to go ahead and include in this section while I'm thinking about it. He says at the beginning of chapter 12, he says, now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Right? So let me give you another thought that people have seen in this. So I've given you kind of the historical side of what actually happened, you know, that we know about with Jesus and his mother. And but, you know, the Bible says that when God created the stars in the sky, that they were for times and seasons. And often that word season there, it doesn't just mean like fall, summer, winter, you know, it often means epochs, you know, big seasons of creation, you know, that kind of thing. So in other words, there is an idea that the stars and the way that God has set things up tells a story, right? So let me give you an example. If you've ever heard people try and date the birth of Jesus, other than just guessing, one of the ways that they do it is with this passage right here. So let me explain. The constellation Virgo is the virgin woman, right? And so keep in mind, he says this is a sign that appeared in the heaven. The woman, the virgin Virgo, who is with child, it says she's clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. So essentially what they're doing is saying, okay, so this could be describing the actual constellation of Virgo, and giving us a clue as to when the child is born. So in that world around Virgo, there were 12 stars visible to the night eye, to the naked eye in the night. And so when they say, I see this virgin woman with 12 stars around her, there are people that have studied the astronomy of things, and they look at that and say, well, that's an actual thing. And then if you're talking about her being clothed in the sun, then that means that the sun on its trajectory is passing through that constellation. And then the moon were under her feet. All right, so at what point was the moon under her feet and the sun passed through. And so you have Virgo up there, the 12 stars. Now, it's interesting that during the general couple of years that Jesus was born, that's what you had. It was Virgo in the night sky with the 12 stars, and right around August to September is when the sun's passing was through the woman. So the woman clothed in the sun's passing through Virgo was right around August, and then the moon being under her feet came to an exact date, right? So this date will sound familiar to people in America, but it's September 11th. Is the exact date that you had Virgo, the 12 stars, the sun passing through, and the day the moon was under her feet, September 11th of 3 BC. Now, it's interesting to me because my understanding, and historically, Herod dies in 4 BC, right? So Jesus couldn't have been born in 3 BC if Herod died in 4 BC, but I've seen some commentaries that have said there's a strong case to be made that Herod died in 1 BC, and that those reports of 4 BC are inaccurate, and they all reference this book where this guy's put together this history of this. And I went on Amazon, and there is only one copy I could find, and the guy wants $445 for it. And so, needless to say, I've not bought it yet. And so I'm hoping that another version of this book will pop up somewhere, or maybe I can find one at a library system and have it sent to me or something. I don't know. So I don't know the research behind that, about whether Herod actually really could have been killed in 1 BC versus 4 BC. But anyways, this sign of Virgo, the 12 stars, sun passing through, moon under her feet. And interestingly enough, many people in that world thought that Jupiter was the sign of the Messiah, and on that day, that whole season actually, Jupiter was in the belly of Virgo. So the Messiah is in the woman's belly, the 12 stars are there. Now, here's the other part. At the same time, Scorpio was there in the night sky, which they called that the dragon. We call it Scorpio the scorpion. So the tail of the scorpion in their world would be the tail of the dragon, right? And so it is also there at the same time that Christ is born in the night sky. And his tail is in between the 8th and 9th stars, which means 2/3 of the star are on this side, 1/3 of the stars are on this side of his tail, as if he's going to sweep them down to the earth, like how the passage says. So anyways, kind of an interesting idea that, because God said he was going to put these stars in the sky for times and seasons. And that's more than just summer and winter, that kind of thing. I think he's telling a story, through all of these. And I won't get into it too much, but I think there's a story where Jesus says when he's getting ready for Passover, he says, I want you to go find a man carrying a water jar, which is strange because normally it was the woman who would be carrying the water jar. He says, I want you to find a man carrying a water jar. And so anyways, that is one of the next heavenly signs that we're moving into is Aquarius, I think is what that one's called. And it's the man carrying the water jar. And so I think there's some imagery there that God put these things in a specific order because he's telling a story through all of his creation. So anyways, that's kind of an interesting thought. Clearly we know the history of how the story played out. But it is interesting that at the same time Jesus is born, the star above is Virgo, the 12 stars around her, the sun passes through, and the moon is under her feet on September 11th, 3 BC. Now, this is also, I believe, when the Magi come to look for the Messiah, and they say, we have seen his star in the sky, and so we've come looking for him. I think this is what they're seeing. They're seeing the woman with Jupiter in the middle, the dragon coming, and they're saying, it's all come together. This is the sign of the birth of the Messiah, and so we have come. And so I think that's what they were looking for. And so it wasn't, if you're wondering what in the world could that have been when they say they saw the Messiah's star in the sky and they came looking for him, I think this is what they're talking about. The Virgin with the Jupiter on the inside and the 12 stars, and the sun passing through and the moon under her feet. They knew what to look for. And so I think they saw Jupiter in the belly of Virgo, and they had been told, probably by Daniel, that that would be something to look for when it was time for the birth of the Messiah. All right? Okay, so that part was kind of just a nice little interesting aside.